Give me a couple questions. We can get a couple done in 15 minutes.
Okay, let's
see. You can tag it on to one of the other programs.
Okay, let's. Let me get a good one then. Oh, okay. Here's one. Here's a really good one. I want to understand, and I want to agree with what you've said before regarding your making no distinction between physical dependence and addiction. But when I hear physical dependence, I'm thinking of withdrawal, like sweating, flu symptoms, or worse in the case of drinking or benzodiazepines. There must be some distinction between what's physical and what's psychological at this stage, right? Or am I overthinking something?
Well, that's a good question. When your body readjusts to something, it's now called a pathological concept of withdrawal. As I write about in my book, The Meaning of Addiction, everything that has an effect on your nervous system has a reaction when you stop taking it. And there's no distinction. At one point, that distinction used to be made between addictive drugs and physically. DSM and pharmacology doesn't use terms like physical dependence themselves anymore because it's too global. You can't ever tell, well, why are they reacting to eliminating a painkiller? Or why do some people react so extremely to it and others don't? It can't ever be defined in simple terms as one thing or another. And then I would ask this questioner, have you ever withdrawn, or have you ever known anybody who's withdrawn from a love relationship? Have you ever known anybody who felt they couldn't endure going on in life and they killed themselves? Nobody ever, hardly anybody in the history of the world has killed themselves when they quit smoking or even quit a heroin addiction or quit cocaine. It's the largest source of suicide. Love addiction is the largest source of suicide and murder in America. And so there's a list of things that people take compulsively and negatively. And it's things that are extremely engaging that overwhelm your overall experience. And things like that, when people quit and they've been addicted to, tend to create a commonality of a response. And yet we don't notice that when people leave a hospital. Norman Zinberg was the first person to say, people don't say when they leave a hospital, even if they've been on a really powerful anesthetic narcotic for 8 days or 10 days or 20, they don't say, I was going through withdrawal when they come home. Yeah. They say, oh, I got out of the hospital and I came home. I'm really glad to come home. And they give them some other painkiller, which is obviously 1,000 times less than what they were getting in an IV infusion. So all of these things are gradated. They're a standard part of taking anything that powerfully affects the central nervous system. And love and sex, nothing affects the central nervous system more than those things. And afterwards, there's a readjustment. And for what it's worth, the opponent process model that Richard Solomon describes says that every powerful experience has a powerful after effect. And he likened love, he threw love into that category. So those distinctions between things that are caused physically and psychologically cannot be maintained. They can never be distinguished one from the other. You can't describe things that cause physical dependence and things that don't cause physical dependence. You can't describe addiction, why people are committed to something, or why they have more or less severe withdrawal based on some imagined kind of physical versus some other kind of response. It can't be done. And it's a fool's errand to do it. Everybody knows it can't. Pharmacologists know it can't be done. And that's why so they keep writing things like, so you'll read things back to the 50s where they say, the object of distinguishing between physical and psychological dependence is a fool's errand. There's no human way or scientific way of determining that.
So let me take it here, and then we'll have 10 minutes for one more question. But Jordan Peterson and his daughter keep making this distinction all the time. People watching this, maybe this is not linked to it, but we just did a talk about Jordan Peterson and how he had benzodiazepine withdrawals and an addiction to it. And they keep saying, no, he wasn't addicted to it. He was physically dependent on him. So that's a distinction that you would say is a little bit misguided.
And what's the difference? He was physically dependent. So he's saying he wasn't addicted to benzodiazepines.
Right.
So then why did he want to quit them then?
Right. That was my question earlier on. It's like, if they were working for you and you think that they're great, then why do you want to quit them again? I mean, he was taking them despite the fact that, whether it's true or not, he took benzodiazepines despite what he thought they were causing him tremors and horrible anxiety, and he kept taking them. So then he wanted to stop.
I always point out to people, it means nothing to them. DSM-4 did away with the concept of addiction, and it only used the term dependence. I don't want to depress people, but DSM-5 doesn't use the term addiction or dependence.
Right.
Because it doesn't get you anywhere, except, and there should be a footnote in DSM-5. I was actually a contributor on the advisory council of DSM-4, but I've gone downhill. They didn't consult me with DSM-5. The only thing that it's called substance use and behavioral addiction disorders. Only one thing in the DSM-5 only identifies one thing in the universe as addictive, and it's not heroin, alcohol, cocaine, and cigarettes. The word addiction, it's gambling.
Addictive,
so,
yeah.
apropos of your first question, and they don't use the term. They don't use the term dependence. It's just too misleading. All the concepts that have. When we wrote Love and Addiction, a good friend of her sister was a psychiatrist, and she said, we wrote Love and Addiction was published in 1975. Well, medicine knows what addiction is. We've gone completely backwards now. And as I pointed out in another one of our blog posts, only within the last couple of months has Wikipedia changed its definition of addiction from being a brain disease to being something that's much broader than that. We're always seeing addiction being redefined. And with all due modesty, getting on to 50 years after Archie and I wrote Love and Addiction, the definition that they're coming up with for addiction is looking more and more all the time like the one that we had in 1975.
Getting closer and closer to yours. Let me get onto this one because there's not much time, and it's a good one. It says, "Hey, I'm loving the recent interviews, and I'm working on some of the books that we suggested. I have to be honest, I'm not working in an area with a lot of thoughtful substance use treatment providers. People act like they get it, but still push abstinence. I work in a community mental health setting and find myself in conflict with the treatment being provided often. I know that the amazing folks I work with really need access to stable jobs, housing, and community, etc. And in our system, they'd be left with nothing if they choose not to play the treatment game. So I'm just trying to be useful, but man, it's hard. I feel that tension between the harm caused by the dominant. I feel that tension between the harm caused by the dominant approach to treatment, but feel like something is better than nothing for these folks. I don't hide my thoughts, but I know that the unspoken often becomes assumed to be the dominant cultural message about substances. Anyway, do you have any recommendations about where I could plug in?
I mention often the ugly, hateful letters like Stanton Peele, UPOS, that I get now from Gabor's followers, but I've gotten thousands of them over my career from diseased people. I wouldn't say I've gotten thousands of letters like this. Maybe I've gotten 1,000 letters like this. Not as many as the ones who hate me, but guys or people who are working within the system, who feel it's harmful, who've had different experiences. So you and I know a person like that. Sean's a guy in my neighborhood that you met online who came out of that background, who underwent that kind of a treatment, who worked in that kind of an agency. And eventually, he said, this doesn't work for me or for the people that I'm working for. I'm going to create an alternative type of approach that he practices as a private therapist. And when I meet with him, I always try and convince him to try and go out and create a kind of a program. But that's what we're doing. We feel that you can help people without convincing them that they have a disease, that they're never overcome, that it's biologically programmed. We feel that you should be able to help people. And our justification is, somebody could write a letter and say, if you believe that most people overcome addiction naturally, why the hell do you have a service that helps people? Because the average half-life for cocaine dependence is 5 years, for marijuana, 6 years, for alcohol, 16 years, and for smoking is 23 years. Some people might want to, move it along a little quicker. And since we've seen it happen and we've worked with people and we've undergone these experiences ourselves, we feel that we can help them in that process. And as well as you and I have discussed, and as partially goes to answering this letter, telling people that they're addicted or dependent and that's who they are is harmful. So that you can, whatever help you offer, support, insight, help with work, help with relationships, help with money, whatever practical guidance you can do, whatever psychological benefit that you can give to people should never come at the cost of convincing them that they're have a lifetime disease, which erases all of the possible good that you might have otherwise done.
As for the last tag of that message, he says, do you have any advice about where to plug in? I think that's where he's trying to say is like, I don't know, what do I like create something? Is there somewhere I can go to?
Well, the easiest thing to do, we have to give a shout out. The easiest thing you can do is SMART. Although, sometimes I find SMART, Thomas told us, you've interviewed him, that they're going harm reduction, that they're no longer totally abstinence. I've given a lot of lectures over online, and our great friend D, who you're going to be re-interviewing, always says, Stanton, don't get into a debate with people about disease, because some of our people believe it's a disease. So I know that's not how Tom, the past president, I'm not sure what his current status is. I know he believes the same thing, but sometimes I worry about the message they get in SMART, but it's definitely, there's a lot more leeway in SMART than in AA for deciding whether you have a lifelong disease or if you choose or you want to encourage people to broaden their thinking. That's the easiest resource to go to. And of course, that's a little plug for Life Process Program. For a rather small price, any person that you encounter, a lot of the people that you encounter, another thing that Ann Earl wrote us, do you happen to remember the name of it? There's a new online treatment for addiction. It was a woman. It was written in some popular magazine.
Looking at it now.
And she said, well, there are only 4 things that I disagreed with AA. I could never join AA. First was that I was powerless. Second was a lack of a holistic approach, not looking at everything involved in your whole life. Third was submitting your power to somebody else and giving up your agency. And, fourth was not realizing your potential in life and who you were as a man or a woman. So he's going to encounter people who on their own, they call it denial. They say, oh, they're just resisting AA and the disease model. He can say to them, well, there are other people that think the same way as you, and I can understand why you think that way. And frankly, I feel that way. There are resources, SMART, Recovery, the Life Process Program are 2 examples. This program that, I think it was in Vogue magazine or something like that. There's a lot of alternatives now out there that you can try to find, because the disease model doesn't work and it's falling apart at its core.
I say to that person, reach out. I mean, I'd love to talk about this more, because I'm always interested in people. This is what I've done. I mean, I never became credentialed in any of the things I felt I wanted to do because I didn't want to be a slave to the thing I'm being credentialed for. And people warn me that that's a horrible idea, but in some ways that's worked out well, and I get to live my values, and it's nice. It's not exactly a good roadmap to doing it, but
when we met Sean, he's an example of somebody who had to fight his way out. Like this how to fight his way out from under the disease theory, which he
Yeah.
A, applied to himself, and B, worked in an agency like that.
Yeah.
So you struggled, you went to AA meetings and you said, you know, this isn't working for me. And you obviously you're more common than not. If you talk to people at AA, here's the question you ask them: what percentage of people that you know in your life and your time at AA that have come to AA have stayed with it? You know, the answer is 5 or 10%. And then of all the people who sort of stuck with it for a while, what percentage of them really became, by your definition, sober? It's another, like, what, 5 or 10%? We're down to 1 in 100. So the question is, what about the other 99 out of 100 who just weren't attracted enough to even try to deal with it in the first place, and who, even if they tried for a while, couldn't really make it stick or work for them?
So the answer is good that you're doing something and that you want to do something, and let's keep in touch. And we'd love to hear if you
just
figure
questioning
something out.
these things and being a source of alternative thinking is in of itself a great thing that you've done, and a positive contribution you're making. Bless your little heart.
And I've got to sign off. Remember to people to email or send questions either through, and I'll remind you, either through Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, any way that you can get a hold of us. Send us a telegram. If any way that you can get us a question, we'll answer them on video. Stanton, thank you so much. We did kind of a marathon session with a few different clips that we'll break out of. I appreciate talking to you today.
What a great time we've had, as always. They should build a monument to us, Zach. What a valuable contribution we're doing that nobody else exactly does the same thing as. Au revoir.